Victor Hugo said, an idea, something more powerful than armies is an idea whose time has come. And I think that this idea of secret space programs is something that's the time has come. And so out of nowhere, this gentleman suddenly appeared who was there at the beginning. And he was there in the Second World War, and he really was part of the beginning of this secret space program. And so if we want to understand what are these secret space programs, at least in the United States, how they began, we're very fortunate to have really, I think, someone who eventually will be seen as a kind of living legend, because he was there at the beginning. He's a World War II veteran, and he has really given some incredible information on this whole phenomenon. And his name is William Tompkins, and he's here. He's 94 years old. So William, why don't you take a, stand up and take a bow, please. So I'm going to be talking about William Tompkins and what he says about this secret space program, how it began, the documents he's presented, the documents that I've been able to find through Freedom of Information Act and through from the National Archives that support exactly some of the key claims that he's made. And then in the second part of this presentation, I'm going to be looking at what this means for the things that Corey Goode has said, which kind of takes us to the present moment, like what is happening now. If this has been going on since the Second World War, what is happening right now? And I think what Corey has to share gives us a picture of what is happening right now. So I'll go through their testimonies in that order. So with William Tompkins, it all began for him back in 1940-41. When he was only 17 years old, and he basically was an enthusiastic model builder of these Navy ships, and his method for building these Navy models was so precise that it came to the attention of the US Navy, the Office of Naval Intelligence, because they first thought that whoever was designing these ships must be a spy because they're so accurate. And so his father was brought in for interrogation, and then eventually Bill Tompkins was brought in for interrogation. And then eventually the Navy recognised, wow, we've got a whiz kid here. And so here he is showing his documents or his models to a captain, Captain Goering. This is in March of 1942. And so there's the collection of Navy model ships that he had developed. And here's a letter of acknowledgement from Captain Goering, which basically acknowledges the precise workmanship that went into these ships. Okay, we're not seeing the model up there or the letter up there, so maybe someone from the background. Okay, so okay, there we go. So there it is. So this is the letter from Captain Goering acknowledging Bill Tompkins' outstanding work in these models, and just acknowledging just how this is going to be of help to the Navy. So here he is in 1941, 17 years old, and he's come to the attention of some senior officials in the Navy, a captain. And here you have even more, where you have a letter from the an admiral acknowledging the work, the precise work that William Tompkins had put into these model ships. And so a 17-year-old man or teenager is getting this kind of acknowledgement from admirals in the United States Navy who are not very forthcoming in praising people. You really need to earn it. And so he was getting this kind of attention as a 17-year-old because of his prodigious memory, ability for detailed understanding of what is, what goes into ship design. Here's another photo provided by Bell, showing him with a lieutenant of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Lieutenant Perry Wood, who was, like the Admiral and the Captain, was very impressed with the precise workmanship that Bill Tompkins had been involved in. And so Bill, at that time, was recruited into the Navy, but he went through a very interesting training process. Rather than being put through boot camp and so forth, as many Navy kind of people are trained, he was actually assigned to the Vultee Aircraft Company. And I just got a document actually 3 days ago from the National Archives, so I wasn't able to put it in my presentation. And basically, this document shows that the Office of Navy, it shows that Bill Tompkins, around this time, he was actually assigned, got a job with the Vultee Aircraft Company on experimental aircraft. So the Office of Naval Intelligence began training him from 1940-41 in understanding the precise nature of aircraft design and construction, because this is what the Office of Naval Intelligence wanted him to be involved in. So one of the key claims that Bill Tompkins has made, that he was recruited by the Office of Naval Intelligence to be part of a program which involved experimental aircraft design, is supported by these documents. Another one of his claims, and I'm going to go through basically a dozen key claims that Bill Tompkins has made and look at the documents and whatever other evidence we can find that helps give us an answer to whether this claim is accurate or not. But so far the documents show that he was someone of special interest to the Navy. His second claim was that he was assigned to the Naval Air Station San Diego, where he served under Admiral Rico Botta, who led a covert naval intelligence program on advanced Nazi aircraft and research and development. So this Navy officer was someone who was heading up this covert Navy espionage program that had spies in Nazi Germany during the Second World War. So what do we know of Admiral Botta? Well, what we do know about him about his career is that he was the head of the power plant design branch, the Bureau of Aeronautics, from 1937 to 1942. So this is the man who was basically assigned to look at experimental engines for Navy combat vehicles. And that was his specialty, and so he was assigned in Washington DC at the Bureau of Aeronautics, as it was known at the time. In December of 1942, he was reassigned to the Naval Air Station San Diego, where he became he ran the Assembly and Repair Division. So here you have extracts from Admiral Rico Botta's 1946 Officer's Fitness Report, which just kind of highlights his exceptional ability in terms of understanding complex aircraft engines and propulsion systems, and being able to repair these for the Navy throughout the Second World War. So that this is a document that shows that this gentleman, Rico Botta, was one of the Navy's top guys when it came to understanding what it was that goes into experimental aircraft, or in terms of being able to repair combat aircraft or renovate them with whatever latest design that makes them more efficient for the war effort. I mean, this is all happening, of course, during the Second World War. Here is something which is a critical document. Again, this is something I got from the National Archives. So this is after William Tompkins came forward with his testimony through his book, where he presented some documents. But this document here, that came from the National Archives. And this shows that Rico Botta, that he was involved in the Navy's research into experimental aircraft. that during the time he was stationed at the Bureau of Aeronautics, he visited several aircraft facilities in October of 1942. This is just 2 months before he took up the position at the Naval Air Station in San Diego. And it lists there some of the places that he visited. So you have Naval Air Station, San Diego, Muroc Airfield, which is now Edwards Air Force Base, Douglas Aircraft Company, Naval Air Station, and Consolidated Aircraft. So these were a number of the experimental aircraft facilities that he was visiting in 1942. And this shows that he was a Navy officer who was really at the forefront of the Navy's efforts to understand what is the latest information we have on experimental aircraft that might be of use to the Navy for the war effort. So, very critical position. Here it shows that he also received a Legion of Merit for his work in running the Assembly and Repair Department, Naval Air Station, San Diego, from 1942 to 1946. So, the work he was doing was exceptional. The Naval Air Station, the Assembly and Repair Division, it sent the people that were in that department when he began in December of 1942. There were 5,000 personnel under his control. By the time he ended, there was 10,000. So doing important work, and it was acknowledged by the Navy. And he was also promoted to temporary Rear Admiral during this period. And here you have the executive calendar from the US Senate that shows that Admiral Bolter was retroactively promoted, that there were approximately 55 Navy officers that received these retroactive promotions after the end of the Second World War. And he was amongst that group of Navy admirals or captains that received this retroactive promotion to Rear Admiral. So that coincides with the time that William Tompkins says that he was working under Admiral Bolter. So Admiral Bolter, he had really two jobs. His day job was to run the Assembly and Repair Division at the Naval Air Station San Diego. Then at night, he would basically be part of these debriefings of these Navy spies that were coming back on a 6-month period from Germany. There were 29 of these, according to Bill, who would report on a 6-monthly basis. They'd come to Naval Air Station and spend a week there, and they would give a debriefing on what they had observed there. Now, people have questions about, how is this possible that Navy spies can be embedded in Germany and come back in a 6-month period? Well, the extensive collaboration between US corporations and German corporations up to and including the Second World War, IT&T, the Ford company, many US companies actually had extensive dealings with Nazi Germany, even during the Second World War, and were able to maintain subsidiaries, and they had personnel, American personnel, still working in Germany. So this was one of the ways in which these Navy spies could basically infiltrate the aerospace industry in Germany, because Germany, as happens today in the United States, it wasn't as though the Luftwaffe or the German Navy were coming up with these new experimental aircraft designs. It was the major companies, Focke-Wulf, the Messerschmitt, Zeppelin, all of these major German companies, aerospace companies, they would basically get these tenders from the Nazi authorities to come up with new designs based on whatever kind of specifications the Nazi SS had in mind. And these Navy spies were embedded throughout these corporations. So that's how it happened. I will talk about that more on Monday because I will be doing a workshop, but I'll go into more depth into this period in terms of the collaboration between German and US companies. So the third claim that Bill Tompkins made was that Admiral Bolter instructed him to basically take these briefing packets that were constructed from the debriefings of these Navy spies, and his job was to take these briefing packets that Bill Tompkins would put together, and Bill will be talking, I believe, on Sunday, and he'll explain a lot more about how he did this. But he put the information that the Navy spies were delivering into these briefing packets that Bill would then take to different aerospace companies in the United States, think tanks, research institutions, and so forth. Including the Douglas Aircraft Company, and I'll be talking more about the Douglas Aircraft Company shortly. So here's a photo of Bill just having a great time, Naval Air Station. That's what they did there, just party away. No? Well, actually, no, that's not quite the truth. That's Bill there, and these were the stenographers, the typists for the briefing packets that Bill Tompkins was putting together. So this is the team that were helping him put together these packets. And so there you have the badge, Aircraft and Assembly, Naval Air Station, San Diego. Now, one of the documents that Bill provided in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, and I believe there'll be copies here, and it's a really important book with the information in there about Bill's background and the documents that he provided. But this is one of the documents that he provided, and these are two exit passes for Naval Air Station San Diego that show him being given permission to take packets out of Naval Air Station. So here you have this top one. Here shows that on this date, 1943, he was given permission to take one packet out of Naval Air Station. In this one here, 1944, as I can see it, he was given permission to take 3 packets. So, this is documentary evidence that Bill Tompkins was indeed given permission to take some kind of packet out of Naval Air Station to some location, and this is important because it substantiates that part of Bill's testimony where he says that these briefing packets were involving the kind of experimental aircraft research that was happening in Nazi Germany, that was being passed on to various US institutions. So when you break down one of these briefing packets, this is what you have. Here on the right-hand side, you've got the signature of the original authorising officer. We don't know who that is. Here you have the signature of the final authorising officer, which was Admiral Bolder. So this shows that Bill Tompkins, who was only a second machinist mate during the Second World War, that was his official title at Naval Air Station, San Diego. So he never rose beyond that rank, second machinist mate, so very low rank, but yet he was being given permission by the Admiral running this facility comprising up to 10,000 people during the war to take some kind of packet out of the Naval Air Station. And here you have a passage, and in my book, the US Navy Secret Space Program, I originally construed that to say for issue of non-combat aircraft or airplane, which I took as being a validation for what Bill had said, that he was given permission to take the Admiral's airplane and use that to deliver these briefing packets to Muroc Airfield, to Douglas Aircraft Company, to Lockheed and so forth. But a reader kind of pointed out that actually I got that wrong, that what it was saying was 4 views of non-combat airplane. So I think this doesn't necessarily weaken the case, it just shows that in whatever briefing packet he was taken at the time, this was the one briefing packet. Up here he was taking one briefing packet out using the Admiral's airplane, and that was giving 4 views of non-combat aircraft. So that we can that's something that is very suggestive that whatever it was that was in this briefing packet was very significant for understanding some kind of design features of interest to the Navy. And here's the kind of smoking gun document, which is really critical, because the document on the right, these exit passes, this is what Bill Tompkins provided in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials. This document on the left was what I got from the National Archives, and this was a packet of 1,500 pages that I got through the assistance of Virginia-based an attorney who was helping me with the getting these documents from the Naval Archive. And here you have several of the documents showed Admiral Boulder's signature, and so here you have a comparison between the signature from the National Archives record of Admiral Boulder's files, and on the right-hand side you have the comparison of the signatures from these exit passes, and they show conclusively that it's the same person. Admiral Boulder was the person that was signing these exit passes for William Tompkins. And so here you have independent documentation corroborating a key aspect of what William Tompkins had said, that he was under the orders of Admiral Boulder in taking these briefing packets off to select experimental aircraft research facilities for them to study these documents. And we know, as I showed earlier, that Admiral Boulder had earlier, before taking up the assignment at Naval Air Station, himself visited 5 of these experimental aircraft facilities, the same ones that Bill Tompkins visited. So here you have Bill Tompkins delivering these briefing packets. He said during the course of the Second World War, he did it approximately 1,200 times, taking these packets to different locations. And that included the Douglas Aircraft Company. And what was important here was that even though Bill Tompkins, his kind of normal assignment was as a second-class machinist mate, his covert assignment was as a disseminator of aircraft research and development. And here you have a document that was in Bill Tompkins' book that substantiates that he actually did have this assignment as well, this covert assignment. Now, I think this is very significant, because here you have him being acknowledged as playing this important role, and that this position, disseminator of naval aircraft research and development, was the kind of description of the covert work he was doing. And it meant that that particular position had a certain status. So, for example, you can imagine a second-class machinist mate flying an aircraft to Muroc Airfield, getting off and saying, I've got some papers, briefing packets I want to deliver to, a second-class machinist mate. I mean, who's going to take that person seriously? But he went there as a disseminator of naval aircraft research and development, and that actually had a certain status at the rank of I believe it was a lieutenant commander. So that was how they did it. So what was in these briefing packets that William Tompkins was taking to these research facilities throughout the United States that had been put together from the debriefings of Navy spies? So this is where we get into the kind of meat of the secret space programs. Bill Tompkins said that Nazi Germany had developed 30 different anti-gravity prototypes craft using electrostatics, plasma and exotic propulsion systems. So that what the Navy spies were basically reporting back at their debriefings at Naval Air Station was that the German companies that they had infiltrated, that these were fulfilling these orders for developing prototypes of various flying ship designs or flying saucer designs using all kinds of propulsion systems. So, some of the propulsion systems involved the use of high energy, high voltage electrostatics, rotating high energy plasma. That one of the people involved in this was Professor Winifred Schumann, and he was the head of the electrical physical laboratory at the Technical University of Munich from 1924 all the way to 1961. So this is a gentleman who was acknowledged as a world leader in the research of high voltage electrostatics and rotating plasma at very high pressure and temperature. So he was an acknowledged world leader in that. And what's also very significant is here you have a document, a project paperclip document that shows Winifred Schumann after the war being one of the German scientists that did work at Wright Field, which was the US Army Air Force's premier research facility for any kind of foreign technology, and that would include flying saucers. And so Professor Schumann, after the Second World War, was basically summoned there and did work with them on understanding the principles behind these flying saucers that that the United States and the other Allied powers were interested in, especially after the war. So you have this document showing that this kind of flying saucer propulsion system was definitely of interest to the Air Force after the war. You have the 1950 newspaper stories that began with an engineer, Giuseppe Belluzzo, who was a leading Italian engineer and a fascist government minister during the 1920s and 30s. And so he, in the 1950, published, had an article released from a leading Italian newspaper, Il Giornale, which showed his work on this flying saucer design, which used turbojets to kind of spin the craft around. Then you had that being followed shortly afterwards by a leading German engineer saying, yes, I was working on a similar project as described by Belluzzo, again a flying saucer design that was being kind of developed with turbojets to spin it around. So the Germans understood that there was something about torsion field physics that was very significant for a propulsion system of aircraft, and in this particular case, flying saucers. So, and the Germans were putting a lot of resources into this, and I think what actually happened was that the turbojet flying saucer designs were the ones that fell into the kind of Allied powers' hands, but the ones that used the more advanced electrostatic propulsion systems or the high energy, high pressurized plasma circulating torsion field physics systems, that these were the ones that the Germans were able to successfully relocate towards the end of the Second World War. Well, here's Tompkins' next claim, which is that the Douglas Aircraft Company created an informal Navy and Army Air Force task group to investigate flying saucer data dating from the Los Angeles air raid, which included 2 retrieved aircraft. So this is something that Bill Tompkins claimed in his book. And it's interesting that the Douglas Aircraft Company is cited as being the institution which basically took the lead in generating this kind of informal study group. And I'll get to that shortly, but I just want to begin with the 1942 air raid. Bill describes it in his book. He was actually a witness to this. So we have one of the few living witnesses of the 1942 Los Angeles air raid here. He can talk about it at length. So he saw this. He was living in the area at the time, and he described how these UFOs hovered at the time, something something that was not known to exist in terms of aircraft performance, and of course the thousands of artillery shells that were launched at these things, and they just kind of stayed there hovering. But he did say that there were two of these craft were shot down, or at least they were retrieved immediately after that incident. And so there's corroboration for that from the one of the leaked Majestic 12 documents that Dr. Robert Wood has been a pioneer in researching, and this is the alleged memorandum from General Marshall to President Roosevelt stating that 2 of the UFOs were recovered after the Los Angeles air raid incident, one by the Army and and the other by the Navy, and that one or both of these were taken to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio for further study. So, you know, this document, leaked document, shows that there were 2 craft that were retrieved, as Bill Tompkins claimed, and there are other Majestic documents as well as official FBI documents that show that Wright Field was a place where captured UFOs were taken. So here you have an FBI memo that confirms that Wright Field was where the 1947 Roswell UFO crash was taken. So Wright Field was the place for taking anything captured for study by the Army Air Force. Of course, in September 1947, that became the US Air Force. But during the Roswell crash and during the Los Angeles air raid, you actually had the Army Air Force that was in charge of this. So now we get to a really intriguing document, one that I think is again very, very significant, that kind of shows the connection between Admiral Boulder and this study of these retrieved flying saucers and the program that was eventually set up at Naval Air Station San Diego in 1942. So here you have a document, again this is from the National Archives, and it shows that when he was the head of the power plant the power plant department at the Bureau of Aeronautics, that he was ordered to travel to Wright Field on the day of the Los Angeles air raid. So, you know, this is, I agree, it's circumstantial evidence, but it shows that on the very day that 2 flying saucers were shot down or retrieved after the Los Angeles air raid, and that at least one of these was taken to Wright Field, on that same day, Rico Boulder, who at the time was a commander at the Bureau of Aeronautics, was ordered to travel to Wright Field. And so there you have the date of the orders, February 25, 1942. So this links Admiral Boulder to this research into these captured flying saucers. Now, the next claim that Bill Tompkins made was that Douglas Aircraft Company got these packages, and it was a hub for anti-gravity research and development. And now, why the Douglas Aircraft Company? Well, I mean, during the Second World War, the Douglas Aircraft Company was one of the leading aircraft research centres. As I showed earlier, in terms of experimental aircraft design, Douglas engineers and scientists were at the leading edge of that. And so, you know, they developed, for example, 30,000 warplanes during the Second World War. So they were definitely in there in terms of the leading aerospace companies in the United States. And that Bill Tompkins took some of these packages to the Douglas Aircraft Company. Now, this is where it kind of ties into this informal study group that had been set up by the head of Douglas Aircraft Company, Donald Douglas, that he set up this informal study group that involved at least 3 Douglas engineers, Donald Douglas, Frank Colborn, and there was a third, I don't remember his name, and then 2 Navy admirals, and two Air Force generals that were part of this informal study group. In 1942 that began, but by 1945 it evolved into Project RAND. And so here you have Project RAND being set up in October of 1945, and that was under the auspices of the Douglas Aircraft Company. And so Douglas Aircraft Company basically convened Project RAND to understand experimental aircraft designs, to do research and development, set policy on these. And so this was something that at least we know officially that the US Air Force was involved in that from the very early, from the beginning of Project RAND, General Hap Arnold was the one that found the money to fund Project RAND. According to Bill Tompkins, the Navy was also involved, but at a certain point, the Air Force took over. And why they did is an interesting story, and I'll be getting to that shortly. But you know, what I want to kind of emphasize here is that later on, Bill Tompkins says that he worked at Douglas Aircraft Company and that they were studying extraterrestrial aircraft designs. Oh, is that possible? Well, there's actually a document, even though it's a leaked document, I think it's still very significant in showing that that the RAND project was involved in the study of retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles. So here you have from September 1947, the RAND project is listed in the White Hot report as studying extraterrestrial artifacts. And it's important to emphasize here that at this time, Project RAND was a subsidiary of the Douglas Aircraft Company. And pretty shortly, we'll get to talk a little bit about the think tank developed at Douglas Aircraft Company to study this phenomenon that Bill Tompkins says he was involved in. So here's a document that shows that Douglas, through Project RAND, was involved in studying some extraterrestrial artifacts and also anti-gravity craft. Here's a document that Bill Tompkins has provided that shows, there's a whole packet he's actually provided, this is just one of them, that shows that from 1951 to 1963, when he worked at advanced design at the Douglas Aircraft Company, which was basically the offshoot of Project RAND, and I'll explain how that happened shortly, that two of the figures that were involved in Project RAND, Dr. Klemperer and Elmer Wheaton, that they were doing active research on anti-gravity propulsion systems. So here's a document from a packet that Bill Tompkins has provided that shows that Douglas Aircraft was doing this kind of research. Project RAND is very important, I believe, in understanding the evolution of secret space programs in the United States, because I really think it's the kind of focal point for a divergence between a program that was run by the US Air Force and a program that was even more secretive that was being run by the US Navy. And how did that happen? Basically, Project RAND from early on, from 1942, Bill Tompkins says that there was this informal study group comprising Douglas Aircraft Company scientists, engineers with Air Force and Army Air Force and Navy admirals and generals. And then by 1945, the Air Force took a more prominent role in the funding of Project RAND. So what was going on there? There definitely was a divergence happening, and what happened was that the Air Force basically staked a claim to outer space, and through Project RAND, it was funded by the Army Air Force and Major General Curtis LeMay at the time. He was Deputy Chief of Staff. He considered space operations to be an extension of air operations. And the Navy kind of made the contrary case, but eventually what happened was that Project RAND kind of like ran with the Army Air Forces kind of proposals. And so Project RAND essentially became something that was pushing the Air Force agenda. And the Navy seemed to just kind of like drop off the scene, drop away. Kind of like, okay, the Air Force is staking a claim to outer space. You know, space is an extension of air operations, and they're going to set up their surveillance systems up there. And you know, we think that's not such a good idea. We'd like to be involved, but you know, they made a stronger case. Congratulations, you know, and you know, we'll just drop away and we'll look after the oceans and dive deep down into the oceans, and that's what we'll do, nothing else, you know, nothing else of interest here. And that was basically what the Navy did. They just kind of like dropped off the scene, and the Air Force kind of like went ahead and developed its kind of space surveillance systems. And so the Project RAND increasingly became something that was an extension of the Air Force agenda for outer space operations, for developing a space program. So the first proposal from Project RAND, the Experimental World Orbiting Spaceship, that was the initial paper that Project RAND had published that was an endorsement of the Air Force agenda. So the Air Force began to express an interest in developing different types of Earth orbiting platforms. Here you have a design from 1952 from Wernher von Braun of a circular craft. Then there was another proposal, which was to set up these manned orbiting laboratories that was jointly set up by the US Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office in 1962. It was officially announced by President Johnson in 1963 and then cancelled in 1969. And we know there was a pool of secret military astronauts that were trained with NASA. That's been publicly revealed. There was a release by the National Reconnaissance Office, basically detailing the history of the manned orbiting laboratory in terms of it being an interesting proposal that got out there for a little while, but then eventually was cancelled, and that was it, end of story, nothing else to see here. Well, what did the Air Force do? And this is something that I think, I'll talk a little bit more about Corey Goode shortly, but one of the things that Corey Goode said that I found very significant in helping us understand what it is that the Air Force might be doing out there in terms of Earth orbiting surveillance systems is that he said that what they did was that they used these abandoned second stages from rockets to put together a kind of, that's really a nonagon, a nine-sided polyhedral shape, a nonagon. So you actually have 9 different stage 2s of rockets that are linked together to form a kind of orbital platform. That this is how the Air Force did it. So that early design from von Braun, just a circular space platform, using the available technology at the time, what the Air Force did was basically it used the second stages from these missions that from the designs of the manned orbiting laboratory, that they used that to set up these kind of nonagons in space. Interestingly, it was the Douglas Aircraft Company that designed the Gemini capsules that were used for, that were basically the second stage of these rockets. They were Titan II rockets, and so you actually have there the different parts of this second stage of the Titan II that could be assembled in space to form these nonagons that the Air Force has orbiting up there. So could this have happened? We know officially that the Air Force did send up a few, did test some of these Titan II rockets that were kind of outfitted with a second stage that was a manned orbiting laboratory, but certainly not enough to set up, one, let alone 2 or more of these nonagons in space. But according to official records, Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1964 to 1976 launched 49 Titan II rockets. Now, if you needed to have 9 second stages that were basically equivalent of the Gemini 2 capsules. If you put 9 of these together, and you had at least 2 of these nonagons in space that were being secretly assembled, well, you need to have 18 missions. Well, you have 49 missions. So that makes it feasible that this happened. I've spoken to Dr. Wood, about this, and he confirmed that Douglas was working on these Gemini Stage 2 rockets and on the Manned Orbiting Laboratory. And when it was cancelled, a lot of Douglas engineers basically lost their jobs. But it's possible that what occurred was that even though officially the Manned Orbiting Laboratory was cancelled, that covertly what had happened was that they gave the job now to another company, say Lockheed, to actually do this under a more highly classified program that was run by the Air Force to develop these space platforms up there. So that's an interesting possibility, certainly something that I think could explain how these kind of space surveillance systems could be orbiting that are constructed using disused second stages of rockets out in space, according to what Corey Goods has said from his information. We know Ronald Reagan talked about being able to have 300 people orbit in space. This was from 1985. So that shows that in 1985 there was some program in existence that could house 300 people in space. Certainly the space shuttle at the time that had just begun didn't have a chance to actually accommodate 300 people up there. I think they could hold at maximum like 11 people, and there are only 5 operational space shuttles, so 55 theoretically is all you could put up there at any one time. So this is suggestive that Reagan had been briefed about another program, and I think the program he had been briefed upon was what the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office was able to achieve in the 1970s and the 1980s in terms of putting permanently manned orbiting space stations in Earth orbit. Now, so what was the Navy doing during this time? This is what I think the Air Force did. So what did the Navy do? Well, we do know that the Navy has long had an interest in flying aircraft carriers. So in 1931 to 33, the USS Akron, that was a dirigible that was built by Goodyear and the Zeppelin companies under contract for the US Navy. So the US Navy built 2 of these things. They were helium filled, and they certainly weren't very functional. They were only in operation for 2 years. These 2 flying aircraft carriers eventually were destroyed by storms. But it shows that the Navy from the 1930s was very interested in flying aircraft carriers. So there's no way that the Navy was going to see space as an extension of Air Force operations, because the Navy saw itself as a major air power. It wasn't just an ocean-going fleet. They saw themselves as having a role in the air, in addition to the combat aircraft from the aircraft carriers. So the Akron was the world's first flying aircraft carrier. There it shows the system by which the Akron was able to attach aircraft to itself and then pull them up into the Akron. So there you have an example from the Navy from the 1930s being actively involved in doing the research and development of these types of vehicles. So RAND and the Advanced Design think tank in the Douglas Aircraft Company, the separation of those is very important for our understanding how the Air Force went about developing its space program, and the Navy went about developing its own separate space program. And William Tompkins talks about what he had done, what he had observed when he began working at the Douglas Aircraft Company. Quote, I've been flying up to Douglas from Naval Air Station, North Island, San Diego, since spring 1943. Now 7 years later, it all been over a year since the divorce. Now that's between Project RAND and the Douglas Aircraft Company. The atmosphere in the tank was thick with overwhelming tension and resentment. The personnel who had been forced to stay with the family, Douglas Aircraft Company, were hit the hardest. Those who wanted to stay but who had to leave also had strong feelings. So essentially what happened was that the Project RAND, 1948, the decision was made to separate from the Douglas Aircraft Company. Approximately 2/3 of the scientists and engineers from Project RAND separated. They left the Douglas Aircraft Company and set up what became an independent company called the RAND Corporation, which continues to exist under that name today as a worldwide global think tank dedicated to aerospace policy. And the remnants stayed within Douglas Engineering, and the remnants was called Advanced Design. And according to Bill Tompkins, Advanced Design continued to do this work on advanced kind of research into anti-gravity and so forth, and worked closely with the Navy. And so Bill Tompkins said that what was happening, and this is his next claim, is that Advanced Design was preparing these unsolicited bids for ship designs for future Navy space battle groups. So Bill Tompkins says that he was getting some assistance, and I'll mention who was assisting him shortly, and that the Navy was very interested in these unsolicited bids for building these battle groups, these space battle groups. Now, why would the Navy be interested in that? Apparently they were. And so some of the designs that Bill Tompkins said he came up with included this one, and this shows a kind of modular construction system for building a kind of very large 2-kilometre long space carrier or space transport system using kind of up to 1 million modules. So this was going to be built using some kind of modular engineering construction method, and and this was what the Navy was interested in doing. And there you have you have a comparison of the USS Akron with this 2-kilometre long space transportation system. Bill said that there were a number of designs that he was involved in. Here's a space flagship for a space battle group. So this would be a battle group flagship. And there you have this design was first developed at Douglas, and then eventually when Bill moved over to TRW in 1967 to 1971, he made the same proposal. He just upgraded that proposal that had been initially submitted at the Douglas Aircraft Company. So that shows some of the specifications of this proposed flagship for a space battle group, and Bill Tompkins' involvement in that. Here's another design. Here's an aspect of showing how this space battle group, this space flagship would actually act as a kind of space carrier, a mothership, if you like, for the smaller triangular craft. So this is another design that Bill says that the Navy was very much interested in. So these were the early designs that Bill says that the Navy was receiving from engineers and scientists at the Douglas Aircraft Company, and that these designs that were part of these unsolicited bids, that the Navy then took them up, and over the successive decades came up with detailed architectural plans and eventually prototypes for these craft. So next we get to the part which is really fascinating, and that is that Bill Tompkins said that the Douglas Aircraft Company engineers and scientists were being helped by Nordic extraterrestrials. And so here he says that these extraterrestrials, kind of Scandinavian looking, had infiltrated the Douglas Aircraft Company and helped with the design of these proposals for the Navy space battle groups. So, quite an incredible claim, obviously. Is it possible that these extraterrestrials were infiltrating the Douglas Aircraft Company and giving the engineers assistance, some kind of telepathic assistance, according to Bill Tompkins, for coming up with these intricate detailed models of these craft? And we need to keep in mind Bill's background earlier on during the Second World War, when he was given these covert assignments because he had the kind of memory and the ability to come up with detailed designs for Navy ships that then became of use for the Navy in terms of putting together briefing packets for the construction or the development of Navy or US equivalents to whatever it was that Nazi Germany was doing, that those same abilities that Bill exhibited during the Second World War, during these covert assignments, that he was doing the same thing in the Douglas Aircraft Company, and that these extraterrestrials were giving him help, and that he was coming up with these detailed designs for the Navy. The Navy was interested in this, and the Navy knew that Bill Tompkins and the other Douglas engineers were being assisted by these Nordic extraterrestrials. Very suggestive that the Navy implicitly was in agreement with or agreed to being helped in this way by these extraterrestrials. So, is it possible? Well, we need to look at some of the evidence or some of the testimonies of other whistleblowers or people who have come forward. Now, one of the most important, I think, is Sergeant Major Robert Dean, who says that in 1964, while working at NATO's headquarters in Paris, that he saw the assessment, and that in the assessment he says that the NATO powers were very aware and very concerned of extraterrestrials that look very human being able to infiltrate the military, being able to infiltrate political institutions, and certainly being able to infiltrate corporations such as the Douglas Aircraft Company to help or have an agenda in there which was unknown. This was of great concern to the NATO powers. So certainly what Robert Dean was suggesting makes it possible that what Bill Tompkins was claiming occurred in the 50s and the 60s as well with other companies was in fact occurring as he claimed. Many contactees have made similar claims in the 1950s. George Adamski made those sorts of claims in the 1950s, and George Adamski, probably isn't remembered that well or remembered favourably by many UFO researchers, but it's important to keep in mind that he came up with some of the best photographs of cigar-shaped ships that were acting as a kind of like motherships. And so there you have a sequence of photos in the slide up there when it comes up again, showing one of these motherships, one of these cigar-shaped ships with these flying saucers coming out of it. So, these are photographs that have never been debunked. He took them through his telescope, and so George Adamski says that he regularly met with these human-looking extraterrestrials that had infiltrated US society and were operating in Los Angeles. So there you have contactees making a similar claim. The Russian Prime Minister, he in 2012 said in a press conference on a hot microphone incident, he said, quote, "Along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, the president of the country is given a special top secret folder. This folder in its entirety contains information about aliens who visited our planet. Along with this, you are given a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. So that, at the time he was the Prime Minister of Russia, but only a few years earlier he was the President of Russia. So he's speaking from first-hand experience that the President of the Russian Federation receives these folders, one concerning nuclear weapons and the other concerning extraterrestrials living amongst us. So many people say, well, he was just making a practical joke, but for those who have looked at the video, he doesn't look as though he's joking at all. It's like he's stating this matter-of-factly. So certainly there are some really significant statements coming from others who make this plausible that these Nordic extraterrestrials did infiltrate the Douglas Aircraft Company and other companies that Bill Tompkins says that he worked in and where he came into contact with these extraterrestrials, and that they were helping those companies, and this included, of course, Douglas Aircraft Company, TRW, North American Aviation, or Rockwell. Those are some of the companies that had been infiltrated, and that the Navy was working with these companies to come up with some of these designs and detailed architectural plans for their eventual battle groups. So this is where now we get into some of the kind of ideas that have come forward from some of the more recent whistleblowers. Corey Goode, I'll be talking about shortly, but there have been others that have talked about age regression. Now, age regression on the surface seems fantastical. I mean, it just seems like how can this possibly exist? Well, according to Bill Tompkins, he says that from 1967 to 1971, he worked at TRW, and here's his business card while he was working at TRW, and that he was a systems engineer, and that one of the special projects that he was working on involved age regression. That TRW from 1967 to 71 was interested in age regression technology. Is that possible? In the 60s, could TRW have been working on age regression technology? Well, we know that recently, what's been in the news, that the open source literature has been discussing scientific breakthroughs where the Scripps Institute and a professor from the University of New South Wales, Professor David Sinclair, University of New South Wales, that they have pioneered important breakthroughs in age regression technologies, and that they've been able to successfully age regress some of the organs of mice, and that they are in the process of beginning human trials in the next few years. So this is open source technology which is now being discussed. So age regression is a scientific fact. It's been proven to work with mice, and human experimentation is shortly to begin. So this is open source literature, and I certainly believe, and I think there are many in this room that would agree, that when it comes to the classified world of unacknowledged special access programs, that they're 30, 40, even 50 years ahead of whatever is in the public arena in terms of scientific knowledge and open source literature. So this certainly makes it possible that age regression was developed many decades ago by companies such as TRW, which now is part of Northrop Grumman, but which at the time was one of the leading aerospace companies. So age regression. So now we get to another claim that Bill Tompkins made, is that he said that in the 1980s and 1990s that he worked with the Navy League of the United States in setting up a council or a chapter of the Navy League in Medford, Oregon, or Rogue Valley Navy League Council in that area, where they were basically, his job was to prepare Navy personnel and their children for extraterrestrial contact in life in space. So this is another segment of Bill Tompkins' story, and I believe this is going to be the one of the key things that is going to be discussed in one of the upcoming volumes, I think volume 2 or maybe volume 3. So this is what Bill Tompkins says he was doing at the Navy League, that he was kind of doing this work in preparing Navy officers and their children for a future where open knowledge of extraterrestrial life exists and that people are aware of these deep space programs that the Navy is involved with. So here's Rear Admiral Larry Marsh, who was with Bill at the 1992 opening of the Navy League Council in Medford, Oregon. And it's important to point out that at the time, Rear Admiral Marsh had 2 commands in Seattle, Washington. He ran the submarine facility up there, I think Bangor 9, and also the Navy facility in Seattle. So he had 2 operational commands, and he took time off from these 2 operational commands to fly down to Medford, Oregon to open up this Navy League chapter, which is very, very unusual. And I actually did get to speak with Admiral Marsh. I asked him, told him about some of the things that Bill had said, and he confirmed some of the key aspects of what Bill Tompkins had said, but not everything. But he certainly said that what Bill Tompkins was doing in Medford, Oregon was of importance to the United States Navy, and that because it was of such importance to the Navy, that he thought it was worth his time to take off from his 2 commands in Seattle to fly down to to Medford, Oregon, to open up this important Navy League Council. So this is very significant because it shows that even in the 1990s, after Bill Tompkins had retired from the aerospace industry, he was still doing some very important work with the US Navy, and that he was acknowledged as being a very significant person for them. Now, what was he doing at the Navy League's Medford chapter? Well, Bill says that he was running these special projects. Special projects involving getting Navy personnel and their children acclimated to the idea of extraterrestrial life and Navy space battle groups. Any evidence for that? Well, here's the minutes for and there's several of these documents, minutes of meetings from the Navy League Council meetings, and here you have an item on the agenda was the Special Projects Committee. So here you have a document from an organisation, the Navy League. Even though it's a non-profit organisation, it's a very important auxiliary of the United States Navy. And so this document shows that indeed, while Bill Tompkins was president of the Navy League Council in Medford, Oregon, they were running special projects that Bill Tompkins was overseeing. So there's documents showing that. So what's in these special projects? Bill has shared a slide where he shows some of the things that were being taught there, or that were being discussed in these special projects. And so here you have special projects for intergalactic operations. We will be dealing with the whole new cosmos of space, command, control, communications, and intelligence. So this is a slide that he has prepared that kind of gives an idea of some of the special projects. Well, is there any evidence that he actually was running these special projects involving these kind of command, communication, control systems for the Navy League? Well, actually there is. Here's a document which shows that Bill Tompkins was able to get the Naval Air Station San Diego, or the Miramar Air Station actually, Miramar Air Station, to release a number of computers that were designed for simulating F-14 flight operations. That these were released when the Navy upgraded, its simulator systems from F-14s to F-16s. That they released some of these to Bill Tompkins, and that they were taken to the Naval Reserve building in Medford, Oregon, where this kind of system was set up, which helps support Bill Tompkins' claim of a special project involving kind of intergalactic command, control and communication systems. So, are there any witnesses corroborating any of this? I've looked at some of the documents, so there are some witnesses as well corroborating this. I've already mentioned, I interviewed Art Lumley, who was a commander for the US Navy. On May 19 of last year, I interviewed him, and he was at the time the current president of the Navy League in Medford, Oregon, and he confirmed that Bill was that he launched the Navy League in Medford, Oregon, that he was very important in making it a very successful council, one of the most successful councils in the United States, very active with lots of Navy officers that were involved in it, and that Bill was very knowledgeable about extraterrestrial life. So here and that Bill discussed this at Navy League Council meetings. So Art Lumley, Commander Lumley, was confirming that at these Navy League Council meetings, Bill Tompkins was discussing extraterrestrial life. Similarly, Captain Larry Bowick, I interviewed him in May of 24 last year, and he said the same thing, that Bill Tompkins was recognised by the Navy as an expert and very knowledgeable on the topic of extraterrestrial life, and people at the Navy at the Medford branch recognised Bill's knowledge in this area, which is, I think, confirmation that Bill, through his covert work for the Navy over the years, beginning with Naval Air Station San Diego and later on with Douglas Aircraft Company, where he was involved in these unsolicited bids with the Navy, had acquired quite a pool of networks and knowledge, and that this was something that other Navy officers recognised. And as I mentioned, I interviewed Larry Marsh also, and that was in November of last year. So this takes me to the second part of my talk, and this is where I'm going to look at some of the information that Corey Goode has shared, which kind of like brings us up to date with what is happening today. What could be occurring now. So what Corey Goode says is that he had access to these smart glass pads that had a lot of documents on there that looked like kind of some kind of stenographer notes or stenographer transcriptions of some kind of briefing documents that gave a lot of information about what the Germans were doing in their secret space programs. And so Corey Goode says that he read this in these smart glass pads. Now this was before Bill Tompkins came forward, so this was something Corey Goode had said and that I had discussed in my 2015 book with Corey, Insiders Reveal Secret Space Programs and Extraterrestrial Alliances. So this book came out where Corey was talking about this before Bill Tompkins emerged into the public arena. So no one knew Bill Tompkins apart from maybe Dr. Wood, but I certainly didn't know Bill Tompkins. Corey Goode didn't know Bill Tompkins, but Corey was already talking about this kind of information on these smart glass pads. Now, Bill Tompkins, when he was able to read a copy of the book, Insiders Reveal, he was kind of very surprised. He thought that he would be the first to reveal a lot of this information about what the Germans had done and the evolution of the Navy's secret space program, but saw that that Corey Goode had said pretty much the same thing, or certainly the way I expanded on Corey Goode's testimony, along with other historic documents and other whistleblowers, it fit what Bill Tompkins said that he knew had occurred. So essentially what Bill Tompkins was able to confirm was that indeed there was quite a history to these secret space programs. that the Navy program that he was aware of, that Corey Goode claims to have served on for 20 years in a 20-year and back program, that was something that Bill Tompkins was very familiar with. And as I mentioned, Corey Goode read about this on these smart glass pads. Now, Bill Tompkins said that in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, the Navy began testing its space battle groups, prototypes. The first prototypes were these converted nuclear attack submarines that were deployed in space, and they were the early prototypes for the creation of a battle group that the Navy would eventually deploy in the early 1980s. And according to Bill, the Navy deployed 8 of these. Now, this is something that Corey Goode had also said previously to Bill Tompkins coming out publicly. So again, you have Bill Tompkins corroborating a key aspect of what Corey had said, and this was done independently because Bill Tompkins' book came out in December of 2015, whereas the book I wrote of outlining Corey Goode's testimony came out in September of 2015. So they're only 3 months apart, and certainly Bill Tompkins was unaware of Corey's book at the time. So what you have is these 8 battle groups that had been deployed according to Bill Tompkins and also Corey Goode. And Corey says that he was involved in these 20 and back programs where they do this age regression and this time travel where people serve for 20 years and then they're brought back to the time they began serving. Certainly the first time I heard of this, it sounded kind of crazy. And I first heard of this in, I think it was 2001, 2002, where Michael Ralph said that he had been through a 20 and back program in the sessions, the therapy sessions that he had done with his wife, Stephanie Ralph, and that had been published in something called the Mars Records. That was published in 2000, and I wrote about it in my first book, 2004, Exopolitics, Political Implications of the Extraterrestrial Presence. I talk about this, but I only just mentioned it because really there was no way of confirming this. It was just a fascinating story, but that was the first time I came across it. So by the time Corey Goode had said the same thing, there were others who came out before him. Randy Kramer, in particular, in 2014, had said the same thing. Then Corey Goode came out with a very similar description of this 20 and back program. I thought, well, there was something here. There's something worth investigating here. Certainly not proof, but it's certainly worth investigating. But as I mentioned, Bill Tompkins, in terms of describing his work with TRW from 1967 to 1971, he showed that this age regression technology was actually being developed back in the 60s. And we also know that because of the development of these torsion field physics principles, that there is a kind of space-time effect, that it's feasible for craft that use these kind of highly pressurized rotating plasma going at speeds of in excess of, say, 60,000 RPM, where you have a kind of significant torsion field effect, that this is something that could generate some kind of temporal effect that makes it feasible that people that are involved in this kind of work could be sent back in time. So that is something that I think is very feasible and worth investigating. Further implications, I think what Bill Tompkins has kind of outlined supports what Corey Goode has said, that he not only did he work for a US Navy secret space program called Solar Warden for 20 years, 1987 to 2007, and they had this age regression experience. That when, after he came forward, he then began being abducted by an Air Force-run secret space program that were investigating whether what he was saying was true, because it was news to the Air Force that the Navy could have had something like this. I mean, because the Air Force officials were told that, according to Corey's description of this, he was told that as the Air Force began investigating this, some of the officers that had been abducting him were thinking that, we thought we were the tip of the spear, now we learn we're the effing Coast Guard of space, right? So the Air Force doesn't appreciate the fact that there may be a Navy space program that is far more advanced, that has these operational space battle groups operating in deep space, and that there's not just one of these, but there's eight of these, kind of replicating in deep space the way in which the Navy conducts its aircraft carrier battle groups. We have roughly, I think, 10 of these operational at any time, and 4 or 5 are being serviced, while the other 6 or 7 are kind of roaming the 7 seas type thing. So certainly this is something that's very consistent with what Bill Tompkins has described in terms of the Air Force and the Navy going separate ways when Project RAND kind of separated from the Douglas Aircraft Company, Project RAND morphing into the RAND Corporation, working exclusively with the Air Force, and the remnants of Project RAND that stayed with the Douglas Aircraft Company, working with the Navy with the assistance of these kind of Nordic extraterrestrials that had infiltrated in developing these space battle groups, designs for these. What Bill Tompkins has shared kind of really helps give some support to Corey Goode's claims that there are different extraterrestrial alliances, and that this is a significant thing in understanding competing secret space programs. That there's not just an Air Force secret space program, that there's not just a Navy secret space program, but there are other space programs. There's a corporate-run program, and there's also a Nazi German space program which survived the Second World War. But that's something I will go into more depth on Monday. So these are the 2 books that most recently authored. The first one focuses on Corey Goode's testimony, and the second one focuses on Bill Tompkins' testimony. And I just want to give a plug for the workshop on Monday, which will be held here, not in a nearby office room, where the press conference was held, today's press conference. The same room is where I'll be doing the seminar. And certainly you're welcome to register for that. There's plenty of places. I have a desk out there, and certainly you can just come and visit and register or learn more about what's going to be covered in there. So I want to thank you again, Jan and MUFON, for inviting me. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Q&A because we have some things over here.
Sure.